Welcome back to the garage. It's a cold November day, and I'm doing something a little bit different today. Instead of working on the old Jeep, I'm going to be working on this table here. This is a 50s Lane Acclaim snack table. They came in sets of 3. I've already got 2 of them pretty well done. This is not my first one that I've redone. I guess I can check the vintage. One of the things to know about these is that these serial numbers, if you read them backwards, that's the date of manufacture. So this one is 4/30/51. So April 30th, 1951. So I guess this makes this one a little bit of an earlier one. The overall condition is not great. Many of my projects tend to be of this caliber. This one's been refinished already. It's supposed to be a lot lighter. And it's got some pretty nasty veneer damage right here. A whole chunk of it missing. And then it's all, looks like maybe some water damage. All of this is loose. You can feel. And there's cracks all the way up here. So this whole chunk is meh. So I'm certainly going to have to do a patch right here. And I'm hoping a lot of this will come up. Now I got 2 of these at the same place. They were being sold together as a pair. Admittedly, I paid too much for them. But I knew they came in a set of 3. I had already found 1. So getting those 2, whatever the condition, would give me the full set of 3. So that's why I went ahead and got this one, despite the condition. This one is the second of the 3. This one used to look just like this one. The sides were just as dark. This took, I think, 3 oxalic acid treatments to get it this light. So this is about as much as I can hope for. This is what I'm hoping to achieve with this one when I am able to strip this down and treat it with oxalic to lighten it up a little bit. The best I can hope is that it'll match this one. The walnut part is still too dark. I mean, compared to this one, that's the color they're supposed to be. And this is how it looks. A lot of people these days are refinishing them to look this dark. To each their own. But it's about time to get started on this one. Believe it or not, I've already washed this. And that's the surface I'm left with. So we'll get some stripper on this guy. Unfortunately, right now the garage is just not in a really good place to do woodworking now that this Jeep is in the way. But I think I can still get a few things done. So let's jump into it. For this one, I'll just be focusing on the top for now in order to try to match it with the other one and leave the sides dark. I think that'll be the way to go for now until I come back and finish the rest of it. We'll just be using kind of a standard citrus strip. It's been okay for this type of purpose, though I kind of echo the feelings of many people out there. The original formula was better. Just glob a bit of that on and brush in. Looks like my work table is just a little bit more wobbly than I'd like. Oops. We don't want to lay it on too thick, but we do want it to be covered and stay covered and stay wet so that it can really chew on this. I think it's some kind of polyurethane. Fortunately, if it's anything like the other one, it doesn't look to be put on too thick. We'll turn the heat off so it doesn't dry this prematurely. Let that set for a little bit. And we'll see how this turns out. Just as a side note, because this one was previously refinished without doing a proper veneer repair, I've gone ahead and done a little bit of extra detail to make sure the stripper is good and down in there, because they just put finish over it so that it's kind of soaked in there pretty well. So I really want that cleaned up, even though I'm likely going to be taking a chisel and putting in for this one's purpose. I think I'm going to kind of mirror the iconic wedge shape here, or dovetail, fake dovetail, and kind of put a small wedge in there. Try to make it as invisible as possible, but we'll see how that turns out. Not too terribly long later, a quick scrape, and we're starting to see that lighter color that we want to see come through. I'm scraping with the grain. I have made that mistake before. There's a bit of paint on here. That might just scrape off, but I probably want to do a little bit more on that. Yeah, let's give this some more time. Right, a little while later. Hey, hero. A little while later, and we are ready to scrub some of this off. It's actually warmed up a little bit, so I guess we'll ventilate, as we should. Now we'll wipe the thing down with some acetone. And some steel wool. This is 4/0 or 4/0 steel wool. course occurs to me that I'm using some chemicals. Maybe I should, I don't know, wear some gloves. All right. It's mostly coming off even. Maybe a little bit too much in that area. What I got a problem with though, got a bit of a problem here though. Got this spot here that's not coming clean. That will probably have to be sanded a little bit. But otherwise, that color looks a heck of a lot better. The camera makes it lighter than it will be, but it's looking closer to what it's supposed to be. So I'll get this cleaned up a little bit more, let it dry out, and then we'll start thinking about an oxalic acid treatment to get the dark color out of the edges. Now don't take this video as a real exact how-to type of video. Just splashing acetone on your wood directly probably is not the best idea. In my case, this thing is kind of rough anyways. It was not exactly an investment grade piece of furniture to begin with, so I'm okay with a few imperfections, I guess. But I'm still going to do my best to clean it up and make it look right in the end. Alright, we've got most of the residue off. There's still work to be done. This is looking much better. You can see this one area where I've got more of the residue off from that stripper. But this is more what we want to see. Underneath all that gunk, I'm actually a lot more pleased with the condition than some of the ones I've seen. The seams are all in pretty good shape. Often you'll see that the wood is shrunken a little bit and it's split here a little bit, and that extends onto the edges here. These are fine, of course, until you get to here. Now we've got some issues to address here, and that's going to take a little bit of work. So we've got this water mark here that's in the wood. I'm hoping the oxalic acid will take that out. A couple of spots here, a couple of other darker spots here. I don't know if the camera will pick those up. Like maybe right here it does. You can see the dark spots. And of course the worst part, I've still got a little bit more cleaning to do, but you can see the water damage and where the cracks were. That's actually worse than I thought. I hadn't really noticed this corner right here was actually really bad. So I don't want to remove a big awkward section, but it may come to that, and I can't tell if this is still more stripper, more finish, or what, but it doesn't want to come up. This spot, of course, did come up with a little bit of work. The stuff you use, of course, is 4.0 or 4/0 steel wool, depends on where you're from, what it's called. Around here, I guess it's 4/0 steel wool. Apply the acetone directly to this. That's really what you're supposed to do, that I did not do. And clean with the grain. Very important, with the grain. Otherwise, you end up with cross-grain scratches that are going to be really difficult to deal with. Ask me how I know. But otherwise, this piece is looking pretty good. I needed to make one more pass, I think, with some rags to pick up whatever residue I can. The sacrificial baking pan that's seen too many birthdays is pretty ideal for catching all of this, by the way. So I think we'll let this dry for a while after I hit it one more time with some acetone, and we'll see how it looks after it dries for a couple hours. Or with this temperature, quite possibly it might need to dry overnight. It hasn't quite been a couple of hours just yet, but I did go one more pass until the cloth came up clean over the whole area. A couple of water rings, a couple extra little gouges in the wood to hopefully address. But I wanted to come back to this area because now that this dried up a little bit, it looks even worse. And after a little bit of thought, I believe I understand why. This stuff that's not coming up, if you look really closely and if the camera will focus, it is most likely wood glue from this entire area being bulged up. Someone probably tried. They got in here. I mean, in their defense, they got a lot of it, but there's still, let's see, this area right here is still bulged up. In fact, if you get in close and if the camera will actually focus, I think it was, you can see just that little bit of movement there. That is just enough movement to ruin your day. So I'm gonna have to get in here with, I don't think I have a proper scalpel, but an X-Acto knife. I can get in there, lift that up and work some glue in there. It actually extends this far back. So you're gonna have to be careful if you come across something like this where the veneer is loose this far in. You need to get some glue in there so you don't lose any more veneer and you don't end up with something like this. I wish I had the piece of that, because that's going to be a bear to figure out how to replace. But at least this part, yeah, this now that I've got that finish off, this looks a lot more like wood glue. It feels a lot more like wood glue. So that's going to be interesting to get off and smooth back down. But let's let this finish drying for a little bit longer and let's see what we come up with. I let it dry a little bit more and then I took a stab at that glue removal and a quick scrape with the utility knife. Went ahead and took the majority of it right off. It's still wet though, so I'll let it dry like I've been trying to do for a few segments. But overall it is looking a lot better. The color is a lot brighter. It'll hopefully be a couple of shades brighter after the oxalic acid, and it'll look a lot like the other one that I've already done. Here's an example of where the veneer repair just did not go as well as I would have liked. That entire section just exploded when I was sanding it, and that was as square as I could make it given the rough edges of where it was. There was no... It looked like lightning had struck and it just went out in every different direction, so there was no way to really make this any cleaner. Added to the fact that this water stain would not come out. I used way too much oxalic acid on that and it just did not work. But unfortunately this repair, it was just a failure overall. I didn't have the right veneer. It would not take the color correctly. I think I didn't use the right... Well, I don't know what I did exactly here, but the glue, it seems to have like shrunk a little bit when I had it clamped down. And also I never got to fill this in. There was a chunk actually missing there in the wood. Otherwise that would have lined up perfectly. So from way back here it looks okay, but up close it's pretty dang obvious. This table overall was a success story given how it used to look. It had been in a kid's room, had paint all over it. After it got all the paint on it, it went outside on a back porch and it had plants on it. It had water rings. It was really, really bad. The nesting table is actually even worse. I still haven't finished this one, but it's coming apart. And the back piece is actually, it's completely gone. So I've got a test piece on here that I was trying to teach myself how to make ends of it. And this one's, it's okay. It might work. The grain looks correct, but it really is the wrong kind of wood. So it's an experiment. This is another one where the veneer was destroyed. It got sanded by the person before me too much here. Filler can only do so much. Patches would look obvious. This piece was not worth saving. But I'm still going to try. It's right through the veneer right there. There's no fixing that. However, this piece, it is Lane Acclaim. It doesn't have the dovetails, but it is Acclaim. For whatever reason, the lower table on the snack tables did not have the dovetailing. This is one candidate for complete veneer replacement on the top, because it is square and easy. And I'll have to weigh that option when the time comes to do this one next. Hours later, with the heater, it looks honestly about the same, except dry. Water rings just as they were. Gouge, stains, everything just as it was. Let me mix up some oxalic acid and let's see how that works. Now for oxalic acid, I use this stuff. You can get it on Amazon, probably plenty of other places. As far as mixtures go, I don't really know the proper answer on that one. I tend to make my oxalic acid solution stronger. So I take a sacrificial paint tray. This water is pretty hot. I've been running the tap already for a little bit, so now it's pretty hot. That right there is probably more than enough. As far as how much to put in here, I don't know. That is one thing I should probably research. It looks like, unfortunately, the seal was not good, so whoop, we got a bit of moisture in there. But my intention here is to make a pretty good super saturated solution of oxalic acid. So as long as what I put in there dissolves and keeps dissolving, that means this solution can keep absorbing it. So again, not exactly precise or scientific, but this hot water solution here in my really dirty sink, wow, is now a decently strong oxalic acid solution. So let's go apply this. Now again, this is not meant to be a perfect instructional video. I am not a professional. This is a hobby for me. And this poor table and its other two compatriots were not exactly prime candidates for rescues. I'm just doing them because, well, I'm bored and there's a pandemic going on, so why not? So I have my solution. If anyone happens to be watching who is cringing at my acid solution here and wants to correct me in the comments and tell me what a proper dilution rate is, or how badly this is going to damage my workpiece, or anything like that, please do. I take constructive criticism. I'll be the first to admit that I do not know everything. So if I can potentially not ruin a future project, do tell me. As you can see, I obviously mixed up way too much. But I am actually hoping that this will be put on pretty heavily, pretty wet, will soak into the wood, into the pores, and do what oxalic acid does. It's bleach for wood. My application process here, it's not really that much to it. Just put it on, brush it in. Because the top is stripped and the grain is a little bit more open and not clogged with finish, it should soak up quite a bit. And even though from an angle it looks like some places are drying, they're not really drying. They've soaked up the solution, and that part can't soak up anymore. So I've got pretty good coverage on this thing. I'm especially going over the edges because I want these to brighten up, because they were never meant to be that dark, in my opinion. And I just want to make sure that they have extra good coverage. All these light parts especially. And all these stained parts especially. Alright, so we've got a good bit of coverage of acid solution on there. Now we let it sit, let it dry, and we'll see how it looks soon. An hour or so. And then I'll decide, do I want to reapply another or not? We'll see. Again, it is worth noting, oxalic acid is an acid. If you get it on your hands because you're not wearing gloves like I wasn't, it's an acid. It'll burn just a little bit. So you want to wash your hands, flush with water, maybe use a basic solution on your hands to neutralize the acid. Just a suggestion. Just for another quick and careful comparison, while I've got the two tables in this state, they're pretty close. With it wet like this, it's going to simulate a finish. So the color, it is a bit darker, of course, than this one that's already finished. But hopefully this camera is, like, in person I'm not really seeing, but on camera, on screen, I am seeing how much lighter this one is than this one. And I'm very much hoping to get these two to match a little bit more closely than they do in person. But the top, while dark, is already somewhat noticeably lighter, except in this dark area. So I can already tell there will be multiple oxalic acid treatments on this thing. So I'll give it some time, actually be patient, and we'll see how much of this disappears. Checking in on this probably another hour and a half later. It's dark outside. On camera, you can really see how dry some areas are and how wet some of it still is. This area here where there's a big bubble in here under the veneer. Of course, acid got underneath it, so that section is still wetter. I thought that I had gotten all that glue off. It appears that I have not. So now I've got spots, unfortunately. If you look at it flat, well, okay, now that I see it, yeah, there's still glue there. So I'm going to have to probably do a quick sand on that. I don't want to, but I'll probably do a quick sand on that just to get the rest of that off. I even scraped some of it off, so I was hopeful, but let me go ahead and get that removed. And then I'll probably need to apply a second coat because this is pretty dry and that is still pretty clearly still there. It's also worth noting, if you look carefully, you'll see that the wood is sparkling in a few places. That's because the oxalic acid solution, as it evaporated and cooled, some of the acid crystals recrystallized. So if you're doing this at home, keep in mind you've got acid crystals in your wood grain. So you'll want to remove those and neutralize those before you even think about finishing this thing. Just a light sanding later, and the dark spots are pretty much gone. Just while it's wet, this looks so much worse on camera than it actually is. Just some glue junk in there. Sounds like the dog is misbehaving inside. Alright, so I guess I'll go ahead and go on and throw the next application of oxalic on here. Alright, next layer of oxalic on here. Just slathered on just like the other one. I want to do a quick comparison with the previous one. With the wetness on there simulating a finish. Even on camera, you can already tell just how much lighter the fruit wood, or I can't remember, I think it's a matter of debate whether it's pecan or ash, but the fruit wood, as they were advertised, edges already have lightened up a great deal. And they pretty well match this other one. And that's what I'm going for, because this one pretty well matched the other one, which is inside. So I'm feeling pretty confident already that these will match pretty well. I'm hoping this will lighten up a little bit more because I need it to match this one, and it's still noticeably darker than this one. So we'll give it time. Again, it might take 3 or 4 treatments of oxalic acid. We'll see. Another quick note while we are waiting for this latest coat to dry. Now that it's all wet, you can really see where all the previous water damage was. It's really confined to this one area. This part is very well raised up. So I'm pretty confident that once I let this all dry out, I'll be able to raise that up and just cram a bunch of wood glue down there. Kind of the same with this area over here, and maybe along this split here. Maybe I can work some glue into there. Hours later, the table is nice and dry. It looks worse than ever. It's actually pretty darn splotchy as far as the veneer goes. But this water ring here is greatly diminished. That spot that was there is pretty well diminished. This dark spot here, this scratch or gouge, whatever this was, has not lightened up much, unfortunately. And you can see all the sparkly crystals all over this thing. It's more sparkly than a Twilight film right now, so I of course must remember to clean all those crystals up and throw a somewhat basic solution on here. I think I'm going to throw one more bit of acid on here and leave that truly to dry overnight. Now the acid's solution over here is a little bit cold, but that should not, well, again, I'm no expert, but that should not change its effectiveness. When you look at it this way, with the water acid solution on it, kind of simulating a finish, this thing looks almost correct. But again, this is not the ideal table to start with. It was pretty rough. So anything that this becomes is probably better than it was. The next morning, the oxalic acid appears to have done its job. Now, where I laid it on pretty thick, we have got some crystals everywhere. Of course, as I mentioned before, these must be dealt with, because if I try to sand this as it is, I'll just be putting crystals as sandpaper all over the thing. So I'll start using a basic solution of water to neutralize the acid and remove the crystals. Then I can begin working on these. Now, with the surface pretty well washed of all the crystallized acid, we can kind of see a simulated finish with this wet surface, and it has lightened up a great deal. This ring still did not come out, and as much acid as I put on this thing, I don't know if it will at this point. The darker spots are quite a bit reduced, but they're still there. I don't know that anything can be done about this deep scratch here. But if we compare it to the one I did previously, maybe it's still a little bit dark, but they're pretty close. In person, the color looks pretty darn close. On camera, this one still looks a little lighter. But I may go through and do one more treatment with the oxalic. See if I can lighten these up a little bit. I still have to do the repair here, and then I still have to go through and sand the whole piece, so that may help. But I may do one more treatment of oxalic acid with a stronger solution just on these very, very dark places, and we'll see what effect that has. All right. The next phase in this is going to be to attempt to get some glue under this section right here, try to work some in, and make sure there's no other loose areas of veneer. Now, again, the free advice here, if you're dealing with a piece that you know has water damage, might have a water ring elsewhere, it's worth the time and effort to go through and just tap along the veneer and make sure you don't have any trouble spots that you might not have been aware of. There's nothing worse than working on a veneered piece with your orbital sander, and then you hit a spot of loose veneer that just explodes, and you can't ever find all the pieces, and even if you do, they don't ever fit back together. Ask me how I know, or don't. So we're going to give this a quick tap along the whole workpiece just to make sure this is the only area that we've got to deal with. I want to check this area over here just to be sure, because there was a pretty heavy water ring over there that still hasn't come out. So here we go. The good news is that this section here seems pretty good. They glued what they had down. Here's where we start to get into the trouble. Right there. All along this split. Right there, but that's pretty obvious and we knew about it. There's even a spot way out here. That would have ruined my day. The veneer over here does sound different, but it doesn't necessarily sound loose. It just sounds like it was waterlogged. Okay, so just here and a little bit over here. I'm not sure how I'm going to get under that just yet. But maybe through this. Here's the nerve-wracking part. To fix it, you must kind of break it. So I'll get my utility knife under here and raise that up. See how much glue I can get in there. A glue syringe would be wonderful right now. I unfortunately do not have one. I can feel it and I can hear it. That probably won't come off so well on the camera, but there's glue getting worked in here pretty well. And in the part that has split up a little bit, go ahead and work some into there as well. We'll get those two to lay back down the way they were. And while the glue is wet, we'll go ahead and get all of the excess out of this. Excess that might be coming up there. And we'll go ahead and clamp this down. I use just little chunks of whatever wood I have laying around. This used to be a bit of flooring that I put in a while back. The tape on it, I generally prefer like a painter's tape. Keeps the block from sticking to the table. It'll make cleanup a little bit easier as well when this pops right off, because the glue won't adhere to that very well. Gonna have to reposition things here. Oops, almost forgot to restart the camera here. Got that loose section raised up a little bit. Try to get some glue worked in there. Not particularly a right way or wrong way, just carefully pull it up, work some glue into it, and then get the excess out with a wet cloth here. And it's just best to make sure there's not a ton of excess glue in there. And we'll also get rid of the excess water. Now I need to clamp that one. I don't remember which YouTube woodworker it was. One of them one time said something about every time they were at the store or at the flea market or wherever, they would pick up clamps. because you never know when you're going to need more clamps. And there's always going to be that one job you're trying to work on when you need just one more clamp or two more clamps and you don't have them. I have found that to be true for several of these projects that I've been working on. So now I have somewhat of an abundance of clamps. And if there happen to be more of this type at the flea market next time I'm there, well, I know exactly which booth to go to. I'm a little bit split right now, much like the veneer is. There is a little bit of a loose spot right here where that water had wicked up pretty far into the veneer. I hear it. It's right here. There's a split right here. But it's not big enough for me to get this utility knife blade into there to get it up, to get some glue in there. It doesn't appear damaged. I don't really see the crack, except I know it's there because I was looking for it. It's a very small, loose area just right here. It's only on this side of the crack. It's not on the other side of the crack, or split or separation, however you want to describe this damage to the veneer. I'm not quite sure how to address that. I don't want to force a blade into there to get some glue in, causing further damage to the piece. And given that this really isn't the most high-end piece, I think I'm going to take the approach of Derek from Vice Grip Garage and just pretend I didn't see that and carry on. It may be worth noting that with just a quick wipe down of the table, just with the wet cloth I used to wipe the glue down, it doesn't look as splotchy wet with a simulated finish as it did last time I looked at it. So we might be okay with this. Little bit later than I expected. And that came out pretty well. 220 grit should be a good fine finish for where this piece is at right now. Again, all the oxalic acid crystals are out of the way. So this should be pretty straightforward. Well, occasionally you find things that are a little bit surprising. I don't think I gave the last guy enough credit. Whoever refinished this previously had pretty much hidden this chunk of the corner that had snapped off and been glued back down, and stripping and sanding that made that reappear. So maybe that was one of the reasons they refinished it so dark. Unfortunately, my garage is a little bit limited. I do not have any of the domestic air on tap, but I do have the canned variety. Maybe one of these days I will get an air compressor. And now we've come to probably the most nerve-wracking and difficult part of this whole process. And that is figuring out how we're going to get some veneer in this section where there's some loss. So we'll go ahead and get you right in here where the action is so you can see me make all kinds of fun mistakes. It seems to me, and this is another one of those interesting choices you got to make when you're doing one of these, because it depends on where the loss in veneer is and what the piece is, what the value is, perhaps, whether it be sentimental or monetary value. You got to decide just how you want to approach this. With some people who really, really care for the originality of it, they would not even make these edges pretty. They would get some paper and a pen or a pencil and mark out the exact shape that's missing there and put in only what's been lost. In my case, the approach I'm going to take is going to be to clean up and straighten up these damaged edges such that I can just put basically a wedge shape in here. And that'll be the easiest for me personally. Go right to the top of where that missing section is. And here's where I'm not sure of. I could just do a square right there, but there's this line right there, and I almost want to follow that line. But maybe not that extreme. Bring it down just a slight angle off. I suppose I do have a better straight edge on this I could use. So something roughly there, but not taking off as much as is actually missing. Perhaps that. That'll sand out pretty easy. So I think that's going to be the approach for mine. Your mileage may vary depending on your workpiece and its losses. But that's the way I want to go on this one. I very much like picking up flea market tools that aren't worth anything and cleaning them up and making them useful again. Some of my nifty chisels here. And that's some high dollar stuff. But I picked up a work sharp. Got a new bevel ground on these things, and these are about as sharp as anything I've got. That one's gonna be too big for this job. That one too wide. This one's for mortising, but I think it'll do the top one. And of course, maybe overkill, I've got my my hammer. Let's do a little bit of chiseling here. Thank you, King's Fine Woodworking. This has been a fun little hammer. Time for the nerve-wracking part. I may have doubted this chisel and that work sharp, because this thing is sharpened up so well, and I'm so used to kind of using some dull chisels that I can just push on this guy and it makes the cut. It's almost no effort there. This one may actually need a bit of a persuasion to it. All right, guys, that to me was very painful. Any professionals who may be watching, feel free to comment on my technique. You know, this is how you improve through practice, maybe getting a suggestion here and there about ways I could have done this differently. I haven't ruined this piece. This piece was already in pretty bad and sad shape. So honestly, anything that I do, saving it from how it was, I feel it's a positive. I feel it's a net gain. And there you have it. A lot of nerve-wracking, at least for me personally, work here. Oh, I actually, come to think of it, I do need to straighten this out. That to be a good, straight, vertical line. All right, if I obsess over that anymore, I'm going to continue to remove material that I cannot afford to remove. Even for a small job like this, it's nice to have a little bit of variety here in your veneers. I've got a bunch of scraps, and I'm going to look for something that's roughly that. You can kind of see from your angle, V-shaped. Too V-shaped. This one right here is pretty darn close. Just for some quick science, obviously two dissimilar pieces of veneer, but when you wet that and kind of simulate a finish, these are remarkably close. Just this as is. It is remarkably close. It might need just a little bit of red. The V is on this side. That's interesting. The color is way different on this side. Yeah, on this side, for whatever reason, the veneer is way, way lighter. I don't know that I have the correct dyes at all to make this more closely match that. I'll ponder on that one for a little bit. While that's drying out, And while I'm deciding how to proceed on the veneer and the color issue, let's go ahead and make ourselves a template here. Saw a YouTube channel for a guy named Tom Johnson. He has a very informative YouTube channel. If any of you do woodworking and want to learn more, I cannot recommend that channel enough. I didn't know how to do that. Try to find the exact edges of a piece until I started watching his channel and picked up on a few of the tips and tricks that he used to do patching like this. With a piece of paper and a pencil or some charcoal or whatever you have sitting around, you too can make a very precise template. That should fit pretty darn near exactly. And with a little bit of light tracing, I think that piece will work. I could do a couple of test pieces. I may do that off camera just to make sure what I've got will work, but I think that's about what I'm looking for. All right, I've got my patch piece. I did cut it a little bit big. It's gonna require just a little bit of work. The veneer is a bit thicker than I'd like. This was some kind of aircraft veneer, I believe. So it's got this really thick backing on it that actually helps a little bit because I can thin the backing somewhat easier than sanding through the veneer, because this is extremely thin veneer, which pretty much matches about where the top of this veneer is anyways. So this will work okay, I think. Let me do a little bit of work on this off camera and then we'll come back. I'm really beginning to appreciate just how good a sharp chisel is. That thinned out that backing very well. Once I get the excess off that'll probably sit just right. All things considered, this is actually fitting pretty well. Shadows aside though, I've got a little bit more very fine tuning to do. And I think I need to clean up a little bit of this inside. There's just a ton of wood glue still in there, and that's going to raise it up a little bit. And I don't have much to work with to thin the face of this veneer, so I don't want to take anything off during sanding that I don't have to. That is pretty close to final. I've got just the most minor sanding to do on this side and on this side. And that is about as close to perfection as one could hope for on a piece like this. Now just with a quick splash of water on there to simulate a finished look. Is it obvious? Yeah. Do I care? I'm not sure yet. All right, let's do a little bit of gluing now. We'll get this replacement glued in firmly and let that set up overnight. And be real gentle here with the glue. A little bit really goes a long way. Alright, we'll clamp this guy up overnight and we'll check on it in the morning. Well, next day, let's see how this turned out. I have just a slight glue cleanup there, but I think that's actually remarkably smooth. Doesn't dip down or anything. I'll do a quick sand of the area and then we're ready for some kind of finish. Temperature's good outside. Everything's masked off. Again, I'm only doing the top for this restoration. The proper finish for these types of tables was a clear to amber lacquer. I am fresh out of amber lacquer, so for now I'm going to just use a standard shellac finish. It'll provide the protection it needs for daily use for now, until I decide to come back and strip them down again, all three of them at the same time, and try to get them fully restored to match a little bit more, especially with the legs being dark on 2 out of 3. Alright, that's maybe a little bit thick for a first coat. I'll pull that out of direct sunlight and allow it to dry for about an hour probably. One nice thing about shellac is that it's kind of a sealing or a sealant type of finish. So you can use it to seal in smells and stuff if you've got a piece of wood that just stinks or something like that. But sealing this wood in whatever way possible is my initial thought right now. Just get a finish on it, seal it up so water, whatever, doesn't get into it. And all of this, of course, is reversible later. If I recall anything from the many videos I've seen on YouTube regarding wood finishing, I should still be able to shellac this thing with no issues, and then come back later and put a lacquer finish over that, should I so desire. This would allow me to seal it with shellac first, come back with maybe an amber toner lacquer to warm up the color just a little bit, not much, but just a little bit, and then maybe come over it with a clear lacquer to build up some finish, to give it a more durable finish, which will allow it to last a little bit longer than it would have sitting out on someone's back porch. And after drying for a little over an hour, this is the result, the third in the set. It is hyper glossy, just like the one before it and the one I found before that. Perfectly imperfect.